Well, in studio with us to talk a little more about the financial sector is Allan Thompson. You've been doing quite a lot of business in Zambia, Allan.
Yes, we have been, and first of all, let me please express my condolences to Zambia and to the Zambian people on the death of President Sata. But I'd like to answer your question. Yes, we've been doing a lot of work there. I'm involved in setting up the derivatives exchange in Zambia, which is a new concept, obviously, to the African continent by and large, and to Zambia in particular. And I must say it's one of the nicer places to do business. It really is. The people are very, very open to new business. And while things are a little bit slower than I would like, I think that's perhaps anybody venturing on a new venture like that, it does become a bit slower. But government officials, government organizations are very, very keen to do the right thing. They're very keen to grow their financial sector, and they're keen to learn and implement them.
When you say government officials, and we heard from Noel about the reforms that the late president had introduced in the financial services sector. Is it likely that these will continue?
I can't see that they're going to change. My experience is a limited one, and my interaction with government officials is with the regulator and with the central bank. And these are organizations that are very, very forward-thinking. They know where they want to go. They know they need to do the right thing. And I've been just really blown away with how efficient that they really are, and the urgency to do something and to do the right thing.
Urgency relative to South Africa?
Yeah, look, it's always relative, and we're involved, our group is involved in a number of different African countries at the moment, and by far and away dealing with the Zambian public sector is by far and away the easiest, bar none.
So clearly there are lessons we should learn from them.
Yes, I think so. I can only speak from limited experience in the last 2 years, but I've always come back saying I've never had a bad meeting in Zambia ever. Implementation takes a little bit longer, but the willingness to learn, to understand what is happening in the rest of the world and to apply it to Zambia is almost universal across. I don't know.
But who are the people? Where do the people come from? Have they come through the system?
Yes,
Have they been best in the world, been brought from abroad?
No, I think, and this is certainly what I've understood, is and certainly under the first President Kaunda, I think it was a large emphasis on education. And Zambia has a very well-educated populace. And a lot of people were educated overseas through the government, Harvard, Oxford, etc. And there are a lot of people coming back to Zambia and are wanting to make a difference. And I think when you go into some senior government officials, the people there are usually foreign educated. They know what's happening in the rest of the world. They understand what needs to happen in Zambia, and they're very keen to do the right thing. So, I think sometimes we get a little bit cliched about thinking in Africa that Africa has its own way of doing things and it only wants to go that way. That's certainly not the case in Zambia.
It's an extraordinary situation, given that this is the African continent, that they now have a white president. As a white man yourself, have you felt the different racial engagement perhaps in Zambia, or is this just
Alec,
an
you and
outlier?
I had this conversation before, and I said quite openly, and I said I have never experienced any form of racism in Zambia whatsoever. It's not that it might not exist, but it's just not it's not a factor in the country. I don't think they have the history that other African countries have had, so it's not really even on the agenda. It's just not an agenda. It's not that there's a conscious effort to move away from any form of racism, it's just not on the agenda.
So surely from an economic perspective, this provides them with the best setting to only go upwards from here.
Yeah, I remain very, very bullish on Zambia. Look, I don't want to paint it overly, it's not sunshine and roses. Doing business in Africa is not easy. If it was, there would be far more economic activity, there would be hundreds of exchanges. It's not easy. But Zambia seems to have the bedrock and the base correct. They have the willingness, they want to do the right things. They're not always sure. I think they've been given, in my opinion, certainly in our industry, some pretty dubious advice in the past. And they're very cautious as to what advice they're given and how they want to implement it. So it doesn't always happen as quickly as you want, but I think given the dubious advice they've given in the past, one can understand that. But I think the willingness, and that's the difference. There isn't an arrogance that we know better and we're going to do this, etc., and this is how we're going to run. There's a willingness to do the right thing. We'll do it cautiously, we'll do it slowly, but we'll do the right thing and the right thing for the country.
Are you finding other South African companies taking an interest in the way that you are?
Without a doubt. You know, I think the Zambian economy is a small one, off a very, very small base. But I think the propensity to grow, and certainly, you know, the death of Sata is tragic, but it's a stable economy, and it's a stable democracy. They're not going to implode with the death of a politician. Things will continue. They will elect a new president. There won't be fights. There won't be riots. You know, this is my prediction, but I certainly can't see it happening. And the economy will continue to grow, albeit off a very small base.
What about that issue that Ed Cropley raised about when one of the mining companies wanted to lay off 1,500 workers, that the late president, got personally engaged, and he wasn't scared of using dirty tricks?
Yeah, look, I haven't had any personal experience in that, and I have heard a couple. There were some companies, I think, that were a little bit upset. And the view was perhaps that the president hadn't necessarily or wasn't following what was said by previous presidents and the statements. And perhaps there are some companies that thought, look, this was a little bit offside and not quite what was promised. I haven't had any experience of that.
But that would have been an exception rather than the rule.
I would think so. You know, it would be. I would think that if everything was absolutely hunky-dory and sunshine and roses, everybody would be in there. It's not. There are certain barriers. There's things happen slowly, but it's a willingness to do the right thing, and I think that's the difference in my mind. And to answer your question, are there South Africans there? I go up, stay in a little hotel, and the entire hotel is full all the time. Who's it full with? South African businessmen.
So clearly something is happening in that economy, and maybe you can give us an idea of which sectors are picking up, because often copper mining has been the stronghold of the Zambian economy.
You know, obviously copper is there, but I think farming. I was a guest at the Zambian National Farmers Union last week, where unfortunately I missed an opportunity to meet Guy Scott. I had a plane to catch, but I did have a point with now acting president. And once again, I was impressed. They have their issues. There's no doubt there's an infrastructural issue. But the farming community, I think, has got massive growth potential. I think, if I remember correctly, it contributes 19% to GDP, with huge potential to grow. They have the land, they have the water, they're looking to do all the right things to grow that industry. There are problems, there are different views. But the view is, we can grow so much more. What is it that we need to do? So agriculture, to answer your question, I think, financial services, and you know, I think the labour force is a lot more stable.
Labour legislation?
Labour. I'm not an expert on labour legislation, but I certainly don't see the strikes and all of the labour. Once again, I'm unqualified to speak on unemployment.
But do you see people at the street with cardboard saying?
No, you don't see. But you know, it is an African country where, with the past, there isn't the same GDP per capita as is in the West and in South Africa. So you know, it's not. I wouldn't say it's a wealthy country, but people are busy. You don't see beggars. Certainly not in Lusaka. There's street kids, but you know, I think it's coming off a low base, and I think. To summarize, I think it's a stable economy, it's a stable democracy. There are a lot of ex-Zambians coming back wanting to do the right thing and to grow the economy, and are aware of it. And I think watch that space in 10 to 20 years.
Moving in the right direction is Zambia, and our thanks to Allan Thompson, who's the Chief Executive of Dreadnought Capital.